My father's sudden death at 58 leaves me drowning in a suffocating silence made worse by my stepfather's performative grief and eagerness to settle affairs. The silence in our house was a new kind of heavy. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a Saturday morning or the comfortable silence my dad and I used to share while reading in the living room. This was a thick, suffocating quiet that clung to the furniture and muted the colors of the walls. It was the silence of absence. My father, David Sanchez, had been gone for 2 weeks. He was only 58. Every time I thought about that number, it felt like a punch to the gut. 58 is not an age to die. It's an age to be planning retirement, to be taking up a new hobby, to be enjoying the life you've built. But he was gone, and the silence was all that was left of him in this house. Well, the silence and my stepfather, Theodore Walker. Theodore was 45, and he moved through the quiet like it was a personal inconvenience, where I found myself walking softly, trying not to disturb the ghosts of memories in each room. Theodore would stride through his footsteps, loud and purposeful, on the hardwood floors. He'd sigh loudly at random intervals. It wasn't the sigh of grief, it was the sigh of a man who is performatively bored and wants everyone to know it. He was playing the part of the grieving widower, but his costume was ill-fitting. The sorrow he wore was a cheap suit, and you could see the seams straining. I was sitting at the kitchen table staring into a cold cup of coffee when he came in. He was holding a stack of mail, flipping through it with a practiced, almost dismissive air. He placed a few bills on the counter, then paused, holding up a plain white envelope. "Ah," he said, his voice a little too bright for the occasion. "Looks like the wheels of bureaucracy are starting to turn." I didn't look up. I just kept swirling the black liquid in my mug, watching the tiny vortex form and collapse. I was 22 and I felt like I'd aged a decade in the last 14 days. My own grief was a private, hollowed-out space inside my chest. I didn't have the energy to deal with Theodore's, whatever this was. He cleared his throat, a sound designed to get my attention. "Eli," I said, "it looks like things are starting to move along. We need to be prepared." "Prepared for what?" I asked, my voice flat. "For getting David's affairs in order, of course," he said, pulling out a chair and sitting opposite me. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, creating a conspiratorial bubble of space between us. "It's what he would have wanted. No fuss, just efficiency. You know how he was." I did know how he was. My dad was the most organized man I'd ever met. He had a file for everything: his warranties, his tax documents, his medical records. He was also the kindest, most genuine person on the planet. He saw the good in everyone, which I now realized was both his greatest strength and his most fatal flaw. It's how he had ended up with Theodore. They'd been married for 3 years, and for 3 years I had watched this man slowly chip away at my father's light. Theodore was a master of the subtle dig, the backhanded compliment, the constant low-level drain of emotional energy. My dad, ever the optimist, just saw a man who needed a little extra love. I saw a parasite. "I know," I said, finally looking up at him. His eyes were alert, eager. There was no trace of the sadness he'd been projecting at the funeral. This was the real Theodore, a businessman looking to close a deal. "Good," he nodded, tapping the table with his fingers. "Because we need to be on the same page, especially about the big things." He paused for dramatic effect. "The life insurance, for example." My stomach tightened. Here it was. The real reason for his sudden interest in efficiency. For the past 2 weeks, he had been dancing around the subject, dropping little hints, making comments about financial security and the future. Now he was done dancing. "It's a significant sum, Eli," he continued, lowering his voice. $2.5 million. Your father was always a great planner." I just stared at him. $2.5 million. The number sounded obscene. My dad had taken out that policy 15 years ago when I was 7. He'd sat me down and tried to explain it to me in words a kid could understand. He said it was a just-in-case plan. "Just in case I have to go away for a very, very long time," he'd said, "this is so you'll always be okay. This is to protect your future son." It was never about a number. It was about love. It was about a father making sure his kid would be safe no matter what. For Theodore, it was just a number, a prize. "I remember when he updated it after our wedding," Theodore went on, a self-satisfied little smile playing on his lips. "He was so insistent. 'You're my family now, Theo,' he said. 'You and Eli, I want you both to be taken care of.' He split it right down the middle. 50-50. Our half is, well, it's a life-changing amount of money. Our half." The words hung in the air between us, thick and ugly. He was already claiming ownership. He was already spending it. In the past week, I'd overheard him on the phone talking about a new car, a trip to Europe, exploring investment properties. All while my father's side of the closet was still full of his clothes, his scent still faintly lingering on his favorite armchair. He must have seen that look on my face because his expression shifted slightly. He tried to tack on a bit of sentimentality, like a cheap garnish on a rotten meal. "It's a comfort, you know," he said, his voice softening into that fake syrupy tone he used when he wanted something. "Knowing that even though he's gone, his last act was to provide for us, to make sure we were secure. 1.25 million, it's a testament to how much he loved us." He said the number out loud, $1,250,000. He said it with a reverence that he had never once shown for the man who had earned it. And I said nothing. That was my secret weapon. Silence. I just watched him, my expression unreadable. I didn't confirm, I didn't deny, I didn't argue. I let him talk, let him spin his fantasy of a future paid for by my dad's death. My silence was a vacuum, and it made him deeply uncomfortable. He needed my validation. He needed me to agree to nod along to be his partner in this ghoulish counting of coins on my father's coffin. "Well," he said, clearing his throat again when I didn't respond, "I'm just saying it's good we're on the same page. I'll be making the initial call to the insurance company today just to get the claim started. No sense in delaying." He stood up, his business concluded. He probably thought my silence was shock or grief-stricken apathy. He couldn't have been more wrong. It was the calm, coiled silence of a predator. Because I knew something he didn't. I knew exactly what was going to happen with that $2.5 million policy. For the past 2 weeks, while Theodore was busy playing the role of the bereaved spouse, I had been holding onto a secret that felt like a block of ice in my chest. It was a promise I had made to my father, a duty I had to see through. Theodore was right about one thing. My dad was a great planner. He had planned for everything, including, it turned out, the possibility that his judgment in men wasn't as sound as his judgment in financial instruments. Theodore left the kitchen, his footsteps echoing down the hall, already sounding like the footsteps of a man who was a millionaire in his own mind. I finally looked away from him and down at my hands resting on the cool surface of the kitchen table. They were steady. I thought about my dad, about his warm smile and the way he used to say my name. I thought about his legacy. Not the money, but the man he was, the life he lived. Theodore thought this was the beginning of his new life, but I knew it was the beginning of the end of his little fantasy. He had mistaken my father's kindness for weakness, and he had mistaken my silence for submission. He was about to find out in the most legally binding way possible just how wrong he was. The storm was coming, and I was sitting right in the eye of it, perfectly still and waiting. The next few days were a masterclass in tension. Our house, which had once been filled with my father's quiet warmth, now felt like a pressurized cabin, the air thin and crackling with unspoken hostility. Theodore had dropped the pretense of shared grief entirely. He was a man waiting for a wire transfer. Every morning, he'd be the first one to the mailbox, shuffling through the envelopes with a ravenous disappointment. He'd walk back into the house, tossing the bills and junk mail onto the counter with a sigh that was meant to sound weary, but only came across as deeply impatient. He started making phone calls, pacing the length of the living room with his phone pressed to his ear. He'd speak in low, urgent tones, using words like processing, timeline, and expedite. He was treating my father's death benefit like a late Amazon package. I would just sit in the kitchen nursing a cup of coffee and watch him. He never asked how I was doing. He never brought up a fond memory of my dad. The man we had both supposedly loved was now just a name on an account number, a prerequisite for a payout. The quiet promise I'd made to my father felt heavier with each passing day. It was a secret that required absolute stillness on my part. I had to let Theodore play his hand. I had to let him reveal the full depth of his greed, not for my own satisfaction, but to honor the man who had seen this coming. My dad, David Sanchez, was a brilliant planner, but he was also an optimist. He had wanted to believe in the good in people, even when they gave him every reason not to. His marriage to Theodore 3 years ago had been one of those optimistic gambles, and his decision to grant me, his then 18-year-old son, a durable power of attorney a year before that, well, that had been his insurance policy against a bad bet. Then about a week after our tense kitchen conversation, the letter arrived. It wasn't anything dramatic. It was a standard windowed envelope from the insurance company's corporate headquarters. I saw it the moment I pulled the mail from the box. My heart didn't race. Instead, a profound and heavy calm settled over me. This was it, the first domino. I walked inside and placed the stack of mail on the granite countertop with Theodore's letter sitting right on top. I didn't say a word. I just went to the fridge and poured myself a glass of water, my back to him. I could feel his eyes on me on the envelope. I heard the rustle of paper as he snatched it up. The sound of his thumb tearing it open was violent, ripping through the quiet of the room. "It's from them," he announced, his voice tight with anticipation. He scanned the single page inside his eyes, darting back and forth. A flicker of confusion, then annoyance crossed his face. "It's just a confirmation," he said, the excitement draining from his tone. "A form letter. We acknowledge receipt of your claim filed on blah, blah, blah. Your claim is currently under review." He crumpled the letter slightly in his fist. "Useless. It doesn't say anything about the timeline, about the payout." He tossed the paper onto the counter as if it had personally offended him. "This is ridiculous. We can't just sit around and wait for these corporate drones to push paper. We need to be proactive." He turned to face me, and his eyes had a new hard glint to them. The mask of the grieving widower was gone, replaced by the face of a frustrated businessman whose deal was being held up. "Eli," he said, his voice taking on a tone of command, "where did your father keep his important documents? I need the original life insurance policy and his will. I want my lawyer to have copies of everything just to make sure this process moves smoothly." I took a slow sip of water, meeting his gaze over the rim of my glass. "There's no need for that, Theodore." He blinked a small frown, forming. "What do you mean, no need? Of course there's a need. I'm the surviving spouse. I need to have all the documentation. The insurance company has the master copy of the policy," I said, my voice even and calm. "It's the only one that's legally binding. Whatever copies we have here are irrelevant. They will act based on the official documents in their possession." His frown deepened. He was not used to being denied, especially not by me. In his eyes, I was just the 22-year-old kid, the inconvenient holdover from his husband's first life. "Don't be difficult, Eli," he snapped, his patience wearing paper thin. "This isn't a game. This is my future, our future. Your father made a promise to me when he changed that policy 3 years ago. He looked me in the eye and he said he was making me a 50% beneficiary. He wanted me to be secure. I have a right to see the paperwork that confirms that." There it was again. His rights, his security, his future. "The company will handle the disbursement," I repeated, setting my glass down with a soft click. "They have very clear legal protocols. We just need to let them do their job." My refusal, my calm stonewalling, was like a match to a fuse. His face, which was already tight with irritation, began to flush with a dark, mottled red. "What are you hiding?" he hissed, taking a step toward me. "Why won't you let me see the papers? Are you trying to slow this down? Do you think you can somehow get more than your share?" The accusation was so absurd, so perfectly reflective of his own mindset, that I almost laughed. He couldn't conceive of any motive other than greed. He thought I was playing the same dirty game he was. "I'm not hiding anything," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Everything is exactly where it needs to be, in the hands of the people who cut the checks." "This is unacceptable," he shouted, his voice echoing in the too empty house. He started pacing again, his hands gesturing wildly. "I am not going to be stonewalled in my own home. David would be furious. He wanted us to be a family, to handle these things together." He pointed a finger at me, his hand trembling with rage. "I know my rights, Eli. As the surviving spouse, I have a legal claim. That $1.25 million is mine. It was David's final gift to me, and I will not let his son stand in the way of it. You understand me?" I didn't answer. I just looked at him. I looked at this 45-year-old man throwing a tantrum over money that was never, ever going to be his. I saw the raw, ugly greed in his eyes, the entitlement that had been festering under the surface for the last 3 years. He had fooled my father with his charm and his practiced affection, but he couldn't fool me. Not anymore. My silence was the one thing he couldn't fight. It was a mirror, and he didn't like the reflection. He couldn't bully it, couldn't argue with it, couldn't manipulate it. It just was. He saw the resolve in my face and seemed to realize that shouting was getting him nowhere. He stopped pacing and took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to regain some semblance of control. "Fine," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "Fine. You want to play it this way? You want to be difficult and mysterious? Go ahead, but don't think for a second you can stop this. I'll just have my lawyer handle you." He stormed out of this kitchen, pulling his phone from his pocket as he went. A moment later, I heard his voice from the other room, already speaking to someone in clipped, angry tones. My stepson is being completely uncooperative, refusing me access to the documents. Yes, I want you to draw up a letter immediately. I stood alone in the kitchen, the silence rushing back in to fill the space his anger had occupied. I walked over to the small corkboard by the phone where my dad used to pin photos and reminders. There was a picture of him and me taken about 5 years ago on a fishing trip. We were both smiling, holding up a ridiculously small fish and laughing. His arm was around my shoulder. He looked so happy, so healthy. I thought about his legacy. Theodore thought my dad's legacy was a number in a bank account, a key to a life of leisure he hadn't earned. But I knew better. My father's legacy was in the lives he touched, the kindness he showed, the quiet integrity with which he lived his life. It was in the research grants he funded at the local university and the hours he volunteered at the food bank. His money was supposed to be an extension of that goodness, not a reward for a predator. Theodore was right about one thing. He was going to have his lawyer handle me, and I was counting on it. Because the moment this escalated from a family dispute to a legal matter, the moment lawyers started sending formal letters, the game would change. It would move from the court of his opinion to the court of law. And in that arena, his feelings, his expectations, and his perceived rights were utterly meaningless. All that mattered were the signatures on the dotted line, and I knew exactly which signature was the last one on file. He had just declared war, not realizing the battle had already been fought and won 6 weeks before my father ever took his last breath. It took less than 48 hours. The letter that arrived wasn't in a normal envelope. It was a thick, cream-colored business envelope, stiff with the importance of the paper inside. Theodore's lawyer was clearly the expensive type. It was addressed to me, Eli Sanchez by name. Theodore made a big show of handing it to me, a smug, triumphant look on his face. He stood there, arms crossed, as I opened it. He wanted to see me crumble. The language was cold, formal, and aggressive. It demanded full disclosure of all estate documents, including my father's will, and specifically the durable power of attorney granted to me 4 years prior. It was filled with phrases like fiduciary duty, surviving spouse's rights, and failure to comply will result in immediate legal action. It was a declaration of war printed on fancy letterhead. I read it once, then read it again slowly. I folded it precisely and put it back in the envelope. "Well," Theodore pressed, his voice dripping with condescending victory, "looks like your little game is over. You have 72 hours to turn everything over to my lawyer. It's the law." I didn't say a word. I just walked past him, went to my room, and sat down at my desk. I took out my phone, took a clear picture of the letter, and composed an email. I attached the image and sent it to the legal department of my father's life insurance provider. The subject line was simple: regarding policy hash 774B David Sanchez. In the body, I just wrote, "For your records, please proceed as instructed by the legally binding documents you have on file." Then I hit send. That was it. My entire defense. The next 2 days were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Theodore strutted around the house like he'd already won. He'd leave brochures for luxury cars on the coffee table. He took calls from a realtor talking loudly about selling the house and downsizing to a penthouse. He was trying to get a reaction out of me, trying to make me angry, to make me shout, to make me do anything that would prove I was the unstable, emotional kid he was painting me as. I gave him nothing. I was a stone wall. His patience finally snapped on the third night. I was in the living room looking through an old photo album when he stormed in. He'd clearly been drinking. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" he slurred, pointing a wavering finger at me, sitting there all quiet and saintly. "But I know what you did." I looked up from a picture of my dad teaching me how to ride a bike. I didn't respond. "That power of attorney," he sneered. "My lawyer told me all about it. You waited until your father couldn't speak for himself, until he was lying helpless in a hospital bed, and you started messing with his finances. That's what this is about. You've been stealing from him. It's called elder abuse, Eli. It's a crime, and I'm going to make sure you pay for it." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Elder abuse. He was accusing me of harming the man I loved more than anyone in the world, the man whose hand I held for 8 straight hours as his life slipped away. For a second, a hot white flash of pure rage went through me. I wanted to stand up and scream. I wanted to tell him he was a parasite, a leech who had attached himself to my father's goodness, and was now trying to drain him dry even after he was gone. But then another memory surfaced, pushing the anger away and replacing it with a cold, hard resolve. I was 18 years old, sitting across from my dad at this very same kitchen table. It was 4 years ago. He had a stack of documents in front of him, and he slid one over to me. The power of attorney. He looked perfectly healthy, then full of life. It was just a routine update to his estate plan. "I need you to sign this, son," he'd said, his voice serious. I remember feeling a little scared. It felt so final. "What is it?" I asked. "It means that if I'm ever in a position where I can't make my own decisions, if I get sick or hurt, you can make them for me. Medically, financially, all of it." He tapped the paper. "This is a trust fall, Eli. I'm trusting you to catch me if I ever can't catch myself. Some people might come along in life who seem great on the surface, but you have a good heart. You can see things I might miss." He looked me straight in the eye, and his expression is burned into my memory forever. "Always protect our family's future," he said. "Not just the money, but what the money represents. Our values, our legacy. Promise me." And I promised. Back in the living room, Theodore was still ranting, his voice rising in pitch. "You're going to jail, you little thief. I'll make sure of it." I closed the photo album gently. I stood up and looked at the man my father had married. I didn't see a grieving widower. I saw a predator cornered and snarling, and I felt nothing but a profound sense of pity. He had no idea what was coming. "You should probably check the mail tomorrow, Theodore," I said, my voice quiet and even. "I think you'll find what you're looking for." The next afternoon it arrived. Another thick cream-colored envelope. This one, however, was from the insurance company, and it was addressed to Mr. Theodore Walker. He snatched it from the mail pile like a starving dog grabbing a steak. He ripped it open right there in the hallway, his hands shaking with anticipation. This was it. The letter that would tell him his $1.25 million was on its way. His payday, his ticket to the penthouse. I watched from the kitchen doorway as he unfolded the single sheet of paper. I saw his eyes scan the first paragraph. His smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He read it again, his lips moving silently. The confusion deepened into disbelief. His face started to lose its color, going from a healthy tan to a pasty, sick-looking gray. His knuckles were white where he gripped the paper. And then I saw the exact moment he understood. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. His whole body seemed to sag. The paper trembled violently in his hand. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of pure shock and incandescent fury. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "What did you do?" He didn't need to show me the letter. I already knew what it said. I knew the cold corporate language that informed him that the claim had been processed and resolved. I knew the sentence that stated, per the most recent and legally binding change of beneficiary form on file, dated 6 weeks prior to David Sanchez's passing, the full death benefit of $2,500,000 had been paid out in its entirety, paid to the sole beneficiary, the Children's Medical Research Foundation. The whisper was followed by a roar. It was an inhuman sound, a raw scream of greed and thwarted desire. "You," he bellowed, lunging towards me and shoving the letter into my chest. "Fraud, this is forgery, you stole my money." He stormed into the house, grabbing his phone, screaming that he was calling the police, calling his lawyer, calling the FBI. He was going to have me arrested. He was going to sue me into oblivion. He was going to ruin my life. I let him scream. I let him exhaust his rage. When he finally wound down, breathing in ragged, heaving gasps, I walked calmly to the small filing cabinet in my father's office. I took out a folder. "It's not your money, Theodore," I said, my voice cutting through his heavy breathing. "It never was." I walked back and laid 2 documents on the coffee table in front of him. "This," I said, tapping the first one, "is the durable power of attorney. See the date 4 years ago, and see that signature, that's my father's, witnessed by his own lawyer. He was 54 years old in perfect health and of perfectly sound mind. There is no questioning its validity." I then tapped the second document, and this is a copy of the beneficiary change form I filed 6 weeks ago, 2 weeks after Dad was incapacitated. See the signature line? It's my name followed by the letters POA. It was a completely legal action executed under the authority granted to me by my father himself. He stared at the papers, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. "He told me to protect our family's future." I continued, my voice steady. "And you, Theodore, were the single greatest threat to it. You didn't love him. You loved his wallet. You saw him as a winning lottery ticket, and you were just waiting for him to expire so you could cash it in. I saw it, and deep down I think he was starting to see it too. That's why he gave me this power. He trusted me to do what was right. I leaned in slightly. The power of attorney expired at the exact moment of my father's death 2 weeks ago, which means this beneficiary change filed 4 weeks before that was the final legal and irreversible act concerning that policy. It's a legal checkmate. There's nothing you can do. The last bit of fight drained out of him. He sank onto the sofa, the letter and the documents sitting in front of him like a verdict. He picked up his phone and called his lawyer. I could hear the lawyer's tinny voice on the other end. There were long pauses as Theodore explained then. The lawyer spoke for a few minutes, his tone flat and final. Theodore hung up without saying goodbye. He looked broken, defeated. His own expert had just confirmed it. I had done everything by the book. He had no case. He was left with nothing. A week later, another envelope arrived. This one was for me. It was from the Children's Medical Research Foundation. It wasn't a form letter. It was a long, heartfelt message from the director thanking me for the transformative $2.5 million donation. She said it was the largest single donation they had ever received. She told me that in accordance with my wishes, they were establishing the David Sanchez Grant for Pediatric Cancer Research, which would fund groundbreaking work for decades to come. My father, a man who spent his life quietly helping others, would now have his name attached to something that would save the lives of children for generations. His legacy wasn't just protected, it was immortalized. I read the letter, and for the first time since he died, I cried. Not tears of grief, but tears of relief, of love. I had kept my promise. The next morning, I packed the last of my things into a single box. The house was quiet. Theodore had barely left his room in days. I walked through the rooms one last time, filled with memories of my father. I placed the house key on the clean kitchen counter. Then I walked out the front door, closed it softly behind me, and never looked back. I had my father's true legacy with me, and it was something no amount of money could ever buy.